cannot complete this conversation without flagging gender.
Okay.
So the huge rise in gender violence all over, especially domestic violence. And so the masculinity of our imagination itself, so I wrote, I have overnight become a poet, in these weeks. I wrote a poem where I said, is the lockdown a man or a woman? Is the lockdown a masculine? Just like we ask ourselves whether law is a man or a woman. I asked, if the lockdown is a man or a woman. And so the ethics of this transformation, what is the transformation we imagine, and then how is it how is it connected with the gendering of our imagination, is something that I want to talk about. And so this whole the UN chief saying that ceasefire in domestic violence, I called out, and the men didn't get it, so sorry, I mean the men meaning the men who are patriarchal men, not the sensitive men like our friend here. So but I think that, calling for a ceasefire on domestic violence was such this is like treating the home as a war zone, treating domestic violence as a two-way conflict. And what does he mean? Like after the COVID recedes, we can go back to warring, not recognizing the aggressor, not recognizing that there is a power play there, and talking, and very patronizingly saying ceasefire. Okay, children don't fight. So I think that kind of, so that there is a gendering that as women we have to call out, because I think we understand this. And all the people who are fighting against patriarchy, including Sandeep.
Thank you for raising that up. Yeah. Just to say that I actually believe that should be a topic for like a separate discussion. It's a huge issue.
And we would love to hear your perspective, Shruti, because we're having the same issue in the Caribbean. There's been a spike in domestic violence all through the Caribbean, Latin America as well. And you speak of the COVID being used as the pretext to enforce authoritarianism, and that lockdown has become a means to enforce a certain level of authoritarianism within the home for a lot of women and their freedom and their ability to move around, as well as for children as well. So, and we can't neglect the fact that men are also in abusive situations as well. And many of the outlets perhaps that men were using outside of the home to release a lot of stress and so forth are no more available to them. So they're bringing that into the home. So that's something we need to explore.
Not just men, women, I think we should recognize the fluidity, the gender fluidity. This is a great time to recognize the fluidity of gender and call out patriarchy. The last thing I wanted to just flag, just so that we don't leave it out, or I want to put it on table, is the surveillance, So Indian government has launched with a lot of fanfare and a lot of, noise, an app which is going to, help me keep track of how I don't get infected. And this is highly, highly troubling. Of course, I have not signed up for it. Of course, I don't trust that app, because that is surveillance at its classic, and we know already that people have been identified, named, their names have been made public because they were in a certain location, and they just assume that this person is, and then the person is being attacked. But also, and so I read horrific things about how over the skin surveillance and under the skin surveillance. I mean, I'm appalled by the kind of misuse of technology to enter my life and surveil me is threatening to do that a lot. In India, it is already happening. So I just
we see that on. I mean, these are two very important topics. I'm so glad that you raised them up. Saw. Like Jessica, what you were mentioning, our country is not really perceived to have a lot of domestic violence, but we have seen a lot, like the spike as well. This is why we've instantly created a call center so that people can call there and report these issues. We've also seen that in China and a lot of Asian countries, there's been a lot of files for divorces. All of a sudden, when people are brought and locked down together, they are actually figuring out that perhaps they're not really meant for each other. So those are all the things that we could sum up in one conversation. And the surveillance, I mean, I love it. We already had people that were approaching our group and the GCPR sprints telling us that they would actually like to focus rather on the jurisdiction to the topic of surveillance. The MIT is actually, and privacy goes hand in hand, absolutely. The MIT is focusing on privacy rules and how can we actually create privacy by design. There is also a huge collaboration that I'm engaged with applications and developers that are trying to create decentralized solutions so that we don't really provide governments and central authorities with the ability to track us down and to kind of make the stigma on our identities, just like you mentioned. If my name goes public and everybody knows that I was infected with that disease, I mean, that's going to be a very huge social issue. So thank you so much for bringing that up. I'm more than willing to actually schedule more calls, perhaps even have like a panel discussion with a lot of these experts. I would love to hear more of your opinion because you come from the human rights perspective, and you as a lawyer have a very good understanding of how this affects a person and our rights. So our rights are constantly just being
stigma. It seems that we have to address stigma. What Sandeep said about one person testing positive and the stigma alone, just the fear alone of it, just being spread, you know, an irrational fear. The same thing had to happen during the AIDS and HIV crisis, telling people how you contract it, you can't contract it through this, you can't contract it through that. And I think it's harder now because we know so little. We're still in the early stages of this. And it seems to be changing all the time. The symptoms seem to be changing. New symptoms seem to be popping up. I was reading something on COVID toes. There's some new symptom where they're observing there's a way the toes look and bruising around the toes. New things are coming up all the time. So there may be need in the future for a anti-stigma campaign for coronavirus.
There's already Yellow Canary. Is actually a project that won the European versus Virus Hackathon. It's a broader collection of all the people that are actually fighting these stigmas as well and are trying to help people going through psychological issues that we are now dealing with during the crisis time. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that we should discuss, and I'm very happy that you guys are joining us for the GCPR and monthly meeting, because I think that the feedback loops that we have created through those sprints are going to bring a lot of learnings in the future. And perhaps this is actually the new type of legal collaboration that we are creating here.
That's right.